Hi, welcome to the Hurricane Utah Adult Religion class, sponsored by the Hurricane Utah North Stake of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. I'm Mike Parker, and since 2008, it's been my privilege to be the instructor for this class. The Hurricane Utah Adult Religion class meets on Thursday evenings between September and May to discuss the scriptures, teachings, and history of the restored Church of Jesus Christ. If you live in or are visiting the Hurricane St. George area, I'd love to have you join us. Time and location are available on the class website. There's a link to that in the show notes just below this video. Also on the class website, you can download my notes, which includes footnotes documenting my sources, this PowerPoint presentation, and handouts that I distribute in class. Please note that this YouTube channel and the class website are not official sites of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, the Hurricane Utah North Stake, or any other church unit or department. I alone am responsible for the content on these sites. What you're about to see is a recording of my notes for one of the lessons. If you enjoy this video, please click the like button and share it with a friend. And please feel free to subscribe if you'd like to be notified when new content is posted to this channel. My friends, the gospel of Jesus Christ is true. Joseph Smith was a prophet of God, and the authority and keys that he held are now vested in the First Presidency and Quorum of the 12 Apostles of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And most importantly, Jesus Christ is the Son of God and the Savior of the world. I hope you enjoy this lesson. This lesson starts at the end of the church's Kirtland period and concludes with revelations received during the brief period when the church was led from far west Missouri. Let's begin with some background. Between 1833 and 1836, the economic outlook of the church worsened considerably. The church lost all the land it had purchased in Zion, Missouri, when the Saints were expelled from Jackson County in November 1833. The value of the lost land is estimated at $175,000, which is the equivalent of about $6.6 million in today's dollars. The church had also spent much to support the Missouri Saints during their exile in Clay County and to provision Zion's camp for its march. The Kirtland Temple cost around $40,000 to build, which would be about $1.4 million today. Converts from the states in the east continued to gather to Kirtland, but they didn't have any possessions to consecrate in exchange for land, so the church ended up supporting them as well. Most of the church's operating expenses were paid by borrowing against its consecrated land holdings in Kirtland. Rising land values in Ohio made it possible for church leaders to secure an ever-increasing amount of debt. This was a problem of cash flow rather than net worth. The church was land rich, but cash poor. Joseph Smith considered starting a church-owned bank to make it easier to convert land into credit. We'll come back to that in a bit. Ebenezer Robinson, a convert who joined the church in 1835, later reported that during this time of extreme financial pressures, quote, a brother in the church by the name of Burgess had come to Kirtland and stated that a large amount of money had been secreted in the cellar of a certain house in Salem, Massachusetts, which had belonged to a widow, and he thought he was the only person now living who had knowledge of it, or to the location of the house. His statement was credited by the brethren, and steps were taken to try and secure the treasure. Unquote. On the 25th of July, 1836, Joseph Smith, Sidney Rigdon, Hiram Smith, and Oliver Cowdery departed Kirtland on a trip to the east to proselytize and obtain financial support for the church. They arrived in Salem on the 5th of August and spent 2.5 weeks there. Shortly before they departed, Joseph wrote a letter to his wife, Emma, in which he informed her, quote, we have found the house, but it is occupied, and it will require much care and patience to rent or buy it. We think we shall be able to effect it, if not now, within the course of a few months. unquote. Joseph never was able to obtain access to the house. He and his companions returned to Kirtland empty-handed. It was during this trip that Joseph received the revelation that is now Doctrine and Covenants, section 111. D&C 111, verses 1, 2, and 4, quote, I, the Lord your God, am not displeased with your coming this journey, notwithstanding your follies. I have much treasure in this city for you, for the benefit of Zion, and many people in this city, whom I will gather out in due time for the benefit of Zion, through your instrumentality. And it shall come to pass in due time that I will give this city into your hands, and you shall have power over it, insomuch that they shall not discover your secret parts, and its wealth pertaining to gold and silver shall be yours. Unquote. A folly is a weak or absurd act, inconsistent with the dictates of reason, or with the ordinary rules of prudence. The Lord was not unhappy with Joseph's decision to go to Salem, only with his foolish reason for going. The Salem journey wasn't commanded by revelation. Joseph undertook it on his own initiative, without consulting the Lord first. It's possible that, had he asked the Lord first, he may have learned that there was no money to be obtained in Salem. The Lord promised Joseph and his companions that there was much treasure and wealth to be found in Salem, but this wealth was not buried in the basement of a house. The Lord also told the brethren that he had many people in the city, whom I will gather out in due time. In the summer of 1841, Erastus Snow was inspired to go to Salem and preach the gospel there. By March 1842, he and his companion had organized a branch of the church with 53 members. By the summer of the next year, the branch had 90 members. Today, the church has over 28,000 members, 57 wards and branches, 6 stakes, and a temple in Massachusetts. The prophecy concerning the wealth of Salem for the benefit of Zion has been partially fulfilled, and it may still await complete fulfillment. With the church's financial problems continuing to mount, Joseph and the other church leaders decided that the best solution was to form their own bank. First, a little economic background. The 25-year period in the United States from 1837 to 1862 is known as the free banking era. During this time, currency was not produced by a single central bank as it is today. Instead, individual state-chartered banks issued their own paper notes. Typically, banknotes were backed by gold or silver deposits held by the issuing bank. Notes could be exchanged at the bank for an equivalent amount of specie, gold or silver coins. However, many state-chartered banks issued banknotes beyond the value of their holdings. These notes were not backed by gold or silver. They did this on the expectation that not all the holders of their notes would try to redeem them at the same time. The church's leaders in Kirtland intended to issue banknotes backed by the value of their real estate, turning their land into liquid assets that could be used to pay expenses. They hoped this would solve their cash flow problem and allow them to get out from under the short-term loans they had taken with outside banks. The Kirtland Safety Society Bank was organized in November 1836 as a community bank, with Sidney Rigdon as its president and Joseph Smith as cashier. Orson Hyde applied to the Ohio State Legislature for a state banking charter, and Oliver Cowdery went to Philadelphia to purchase engraved plates for printing currency. Delays in the state legislature forced church leaders to change their plans. On the 2nd of January, 1837, they reorganized as the Kirtland Safety Society Anti-Banking Company, an unincorporated joint stock company that would operate as a quasi-banking institution. Since the printing plates had already been engraved, the notes issued by the Kirtland Safety Society were stamped, so they read Anti-Banking Company instead of bank. Subscribers and organizers of the Kirtland Safety Society were members of the Kirtland community, merchants, farmers, and tradesmen, many of whom became shareholders of the company. The Kirtland Safety Society was formed shortly before the Panic of 1837. The Indian Removal Act, signed into law by President Andrew Jackson in May 1830, made vast tracts of land in the western United States available for settlement. The sale of public lands increased fivefold between 1834 and 1836. To satisfy the huge demand for land purchases, state-chartered banks began printing banknotes well beyond their holdings of precious metals. This flood of unbacked currency resulted in the depreciation of the notes and rampant inflation. The average price of land sold in Kirtland rose from approximately $7 per acre in 1832 to $44 an acre in 1837, an increase of nearly 530%. In response to land speculation and a looming economic crisis, President Jackson issued an executive order in July 1836 called Specie Circular. It required land purchased from the U.S. government to be paid for either with specie or with notes backed by specie. The order went into effect in August 1836, but its effects did not begin to emerge until early 1837, when President Martin Van Buren took office as Jackson's successor. The Specie Circular, along with a tightening of the money supply by the Bank of England, caused a crash in U.S. real estate values and commodity prices, leading to a nationwide economic crisis known as the Panic of 1837. The spike in demand for gold and silver resulted in a stop on payments from all New York banks in May 1837. Out of 850 banks in the United States, 343 closed entirely, and 62 failed partially, a failure rate of nearly 48%. The United States fell into a major economic recession that lasted nearly a decade. The Kirtland Safety Society was one of the banks wiped out in the Panic of 1837. The Society's notes were not backed by precious metals, but by the land and collective goods owned by the saints in Kirtland. The collapse in the real estate market caused investors and note holders to lose confidence in the Society. Many of them demanded payment of their notes in specie that the Society did not have. Most other banks became unwilling to accept the Society's notes. By November 1837, the Kirtland Safety Society failed, and its business closed. Joseph Smith had warned the saints beforehand that his calling as a prophet was no guarantee that a secular institution in which he was involved was incapable of failure. In July 1837, he and other founders of the bank issued a statement in the church's newspaper in Kirtland, quote, "Respecting the management of our banking institution, we are not bankers, bank stockholders, or financiers. A man may be a celebrated divine, that is to say a clergyman, and be no mechanic, no financier, and be as liable to fail in the management of a bank as he would in constructing a balloon or the mechanism of a watch if he had never seen either." Unquote. Joseph Smith and Sidney Rigdon had resigned from the Society in late June or early July 1837, believing that speculation and counterfeiting were undermining the operation and putting the community at risk. In August 1837, Joseph issued a warning to the brethren and friends of the Church of Latter-day Saints. Quote, "I am disposed to say a word relative to the bills of the Kirtland Safety Society Bank. I hereby warn them to beware of speculators, renegados, that is to say deserters, and gamblers, who are duping the unsuspecting and the unwary by palming upon them those bills which are of no worth here. I discountenance, that is, put to shame, and disapprove of any and all such practices. I know them to be detrimental to the best interests of society as well as to the principles of religion." Unquote. Professor Truman G. Madsen wrote, quote, "It has been said that no part of a man's anatomy is more sensitive than his pocketbook. The speculative spirit had become rampant among the Kirtland saints, and many of them saw this time as their opportunity, perhaps even their blessing, to become wealthy. They took risks. They made foolish decisions. Holding notes from the Kirtland Bank, some were bereft of all their meager savings when it failed. Many were terribly bitter as a result. Wrongly, they placed the blame upon the head of Joseph Smith. They failed to separate his roles as a man and as a prophet, and to realize that from the start there had been no prophetic promise of success, much less a guarantee. Unquote. The collapse of the society was one of several factors that led to mass apostasy in Kirtland in late 1837. By the summer of 1837, prominent priesthood leaders in Kirtland were meeting to discuss replacing Joseph Smith with David Whitmer as president of the church. In September, armed dissenters tried to take control of a Sunday meeting in the Kirtland Temple. In the end, 200 to 300 saints apostatized, representing a loss of 10 to 15% of the Kirtland membership. About one-third of the church leaders were either excommunicated, disfellowshipped, or removed from their church callings, although as many as half later returned to the church. Joseph's detractors included 5 members of the Quorum of the 12 Apostles, 4 of whom were excommunicated, and Martin Harris, one of the 3 witnesses. Joseph's critics accused him of being a fallen prophet. The situation became so dire that Apostle Heber C. Kimball later remarked, somewhat hyperbolically, quote, "There were not, at that time, 20 persons on the earth that would declare that Joseph Smith was a prophet of God." Unquote. Joseph was named as a defendant in 17 lawsuits, with claims totaling more than $300,000, nearly $1 million today, over debts incurred in the failure of the society. Those were dark and difficult days, when the prophet needed every friend he could get in Kirtland. Heber C. Kimball later recalled, quote, "On Sunday, the 4th day of June, 1837, the prophet Joseph came to me while I was seated in front of the stand above the sacrament table on the Melchizedek side of the temple in Kirtland, and whispering to me said, 'Brother Heber, the Spirit of the Lord has whispered to me, let my servant Heber go to England and proclaim my gospel and open the door of salvation to that nation.'" Unquote. Apostles Heber C. Kimball and Orson Hyde, along with Willard Richards, Joseph Fielding, and others, left Kirtland 9 days later, 13th of June, 1837, on the church's first mission to Great Britain. In 9 months, these missionaries baptized about 1,500 British converts. In July 1837, 1 month after Joseph issued that mission call, Thomas B. Marsh, president of the Quorum of the 12, arrived in Kirtland from Missouri. He was upset that 2 members of his quorum had been called on missions without consulting him first. In response to Marsh's concern, Joseph received the revelation now known as Section 112. D&C 112, verses 15 through 20 and 30, quote, "Exalt not yourselves, rebel not against my servant Joseph, for verily I say unto you, I am with him, and my hand shall be over him, and the keys which I have given unto him, and also to you word, shall not be taken from him till I come. Verily I say unto you, my servant Thomas, thou art the man whom I have chosen to hold the keys of my kingdom, as pertaining to the 12, abroad among all nations, that thou mayest be my servant to unlock the door of the kingdom in all places, where my servant Joseph and my servant Sidney and my servant Hiram cannot come. For on them have I laid the burden of all the churches for a little season. Wherefore, whithersoever they shall send you, go ye, and I will be with you. And in whatsoever place ye shall proclaim my name, an effectual door shall be opened unto you, that they may receive my word. Whosoever receiveth my word receiveth me, and whosoever receiveth me receiveth those, the first presidency, whom I have sent, whom I have made counselors for my name's sake unto you. For unto you the 12, and those, the first presidency, who are appointed with you to be your counselors and your leaders, is the power of this priesthood given for the last days and for the last time, in the which is the dispensation of the fullness of times." Unquote. This passage in the Revelation clarifies the relationship between the first presidency and the Quorum of the 12. A revelation received 2 years earlier had explained that the 12 apostles form a quorum equal in authority and power to the first presidency. In verse 30 of this new revelation, the prophet Joseph revealed that the 12 serve under the direction of the first presidency. Another revelation received 9 months later in Missouri clarified that Joseph Smith, as president of the church, held the keys of the kingdom on earth. The leadership structure of the highest quorums of the church may seem natural and obvious to us today, but it was still in the process of being revealed to the prophet, even as late as 1838. Let's now turn to the situation in Missouri. As we discussed in Lesson 19, 1,200 saints were driven out of Jackson County, Missouri in November 1833. Most of them crossed the Missouri River to the north and settled temporarily in Clay County. They survived their first winter in tents and makeshift shelters. Some were later able to move into cabins previously inhabited by black slaves. The residents of Clay County initially welcomed the saints, but their patience began to wane as the chances of the Mormons returning to Jackson County dwindled over the next 2.5 years. In June 1836, they asked the saints, politely but firmly, to leave. 2 months later, church leaders purchased land 35 miles, or 56 kilometers, to the northwest that would become the town of Far West. In December 1836, the Missouri General Assembly created Caldwell County with the understanding that it would be a Mormon county. A largely unoccupied 6-mile by 24-mile, or 9.7 by 38.6 kilometer buffer zone called Buncombe's Strip was established between Ray and Caldwell counties to separate the saints from their non-Mormon neighbors to the south. When Caldwell County was organized, it had about 2,000 residents. By the summer of 1838, its population had increased to more than 7,000 as Mormons gathered there from Kirtland, the eastern United States, and Great Britain. Most of the Latter-day Saints lived in settlements along Shoal Creek, including at Far West, which became the county seat, and at smaller settlements like Haun's Mill. Some of the saints settled outside of Caldwell County in places like Adamon-Diamond in Davies County and the town of DeWitt in Carroll County. This expansion of Mormon settlements outside of Caldwell County would result in friction and ultimately lead to the expulsion of the saints from Missouri, something we'll discuss in the next lesson. The Kirtland era of the church ended in January 1838, when the Lord warned Joseph Smith, Sidney Rigdon, and their families to flee to Missouri. Although some saints remained in Kirtland until the main body of the church went west in 1846, most faithful members in Kirtland emigrated to northwest Missouri in 1838. The town of Far West, Missouri, became the church's new headquarters. On the 26th of April, 1838, 8 years after the Lord's church was restored, the revelation now canonized as Section 115 announced the final form of its proper name. This revelation also included a commandment to build a temple at Far West. The revelation directed that the temple site be dedicated on the 4th of July, 1838, and the foundation laid on the 26th of April, 1839, exactly 1 year from the date of the revelation. 2.5 months later, the prophet Joseph received a revelation calling the 12 apostles to missions in Great Britain and directing them to depart on the 26th of April, 1839, the same date the foundation of the Far West Temple was to begin being laid. In October 1838, before any work on the temple could be started, Missouri Governor Lilburn W. Boggs issued his infamous exterminating order, requiring that the Latter-day Saints be driven from the state or be killed. More about that in the next lesson. By April 1839, there were virtually no Mormons anywhere in the state of Missouri. Despite this immense challenge, the 12 were obedient to the Lord's commandment. To understand what happened next, we need to know a little background about Isaac Russell. Isaac Russell was born in 1807 in northern England. At age 10, his family immigrated to Upper Canada, eventually settling in the town of Toronto. He was baptized in 1836 by Apostle Parley P. Pratt, who was serving a mission to Upper Canada. In 1837, Isaac Russell's wife and children moved to Kirtland, while he and other men joined Apostles Heber C. Kimball and Orson Hyde on the first mission to England. Russell was blessed with success there and organized a branch of the church in Alston, England. He returned to Kirtland in May 1838, having been gone nearly a year. From there, he moved to Far West, where the main body of the church was then located. In January 1839, while Joseph Smith was incarcerated in Liberty Jail and the Saints were fleeing Missouri, Russell wrote a letter to the Alston branch. In it, he claimed to have received revelations that told him to lead the church into Indian territory and to convert the Lamanites there. He apparently believed that Joseph Smith was a fallen prophet. By April 1839, Isaac Russell was still living in Far West, near the site that had been dedicated for the temple. With that background, here are the minutes of a meeting held by the Quorum of the 12 on the 26th of April, 1839. Members of the 12 and a few others had returned in secret to Far West, where they met just after midnight. Quote, at a council held at Far West by the 12 high priests, elders, and priests on the 26th of April, 1839, when the following resolutions were adopted. Resolved, that the following persons be no more fellowshipped in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, but be excommunicated from the same, namely, Isaac Russell, Mary Russell, and 27 other named individuals. The council then proceeded to the building spot of the Lord's house when the following business was transacted. Part of a hymn was sung on the mission of the 12. Elder Alpheus Cutler, the master workman of the house, then recommended laying the foundation of the Lord's house, agreeably to Revelation, by rolling up a large stone near the southeast corner. The following were present: Brigham Young, Heber C. Kimball, Orson Pratt, John C. Page, and John E. Taylor. Unquote. According to Section 107, a majority may form a quorum when circumstances render it impossible to be otherwise. 5 members of the 12 is 2 members short of a majority, so they, quote, proceeded to ordain Wilford Woodruff and George A. Smith. They had been previously nominated by the First Presidency, accepted by the 12, and acknowledged by the Church, to the office of the 12 to fill the place of those who had fallen. The 12 then offered up vocal prayer in the following order: Brigham Young, Heber C. Kimball, Orson Pratt, John E. Page, Wilford Woodruff, John Taylor, and George Smith, after which we sung the hymn, Adam on Diamond. Elder Alpheus Cutler then placed the stone, before alluded to, in its regular position, after which, in consequence of the peculiar situation of the saints, he thought it wisdom to adjourn until some future time, when the Lord shall open the way, expressing his determination then to proceed with the building. Unquote. The manuscript history of the church concludes, quote, thus was fulfilled a revelation of July 8, 1838, which our enemies had said could not be fulfilled, as no Mormon was permitted to be in the state. The brethren immediately returned to Quincy, Illinois. Unquote. The manuscript history of the church describes an amusing incident that took place immediately following this meeting. Quote, as the saints were passing away from the meeting, Brother Theodore Turley said to Apostles John C. Page and Wilford Woodruff, stop a bit while I bid Isaac Russell goodbye, and knocking at his door, called Brother Russell. His wife answered, come in, it is Brother Turley. Russell replied, it is not. He left here 2 weeks ago, and appeared quite alarmed, but on finding it was Turley, asked him to sit down. But Turley replied, I cannot. I shall lose my company. Who is your company? Inquired Russell. The 12. The 12? Yes. Don't you know that this is the 26th and the day the 12 were to take leave of their friends on the foundation of the Lord's house, to go to the islands of the sea? The revelation is now fulfilled, and I am going with them. Russell was speechless, and Turley bid him farewell. Unquote. Returning now to 1838, before the saints were expelled from Missouri, The prophet Joseph received 4 revelations on the 8th of July, 1838, that have been canonized as sections 117, 118, 119, and 120 of the Doctrine and Covenants. The portion of section 117 concerns Oliver Granger. Through the prophet Joseph, the Lord declared, quote, I remember my servant Oliver Granger. Behold, verily I say unto him that his name shall be had in sacred remembrance from generation to generation, forever and ever, saith the Lord. This part of the revelation concluded with the Lord's admonition, quote, Therefore let no man despise my servant Oliver Granger, but let the blessings of my people be on him forever and ever, unquote. President Howard W. Hunter, then president of the Quorum of the 12 Apostles, explained who Oliver Granger was. Quote, Oliver Granger was 11 years older than Joseph Smith, and, like the prophet, was from upstate New York. Because of severe cold and exposure when he was 33 years old, Oliver lost much of his eyesight. Notwithstanding his limited vision, he served 3 full-time missions. He also worked on the Kirtland Temple and served on the Kirtland High Council. When most of the saints were driven from Kirtland, Ohio, the church left some debts unsatisfied. Oliver was appointed to represent Joseph Smith in the First Presidency by returning to Kirtland to settle the church's business, unquote. Granger performed this assignment with such satisfaction to the creditors involved that one of them wrote in a letter to church leaders, quote, I feel it my duty to state that Oliver Granger's management in the arrangement of the unfinished business of people that have moved to the far west in redeeming their pledges and thereby sustaining their integrity has been truly praiseworthy and has entitled him to my highest esteem and ever grateful recollection, unquote. On the 4th of May, 1839, Granger was appointed to preside over the church in Kirtland. He died in Kirtland in August 1841 at age 47 and was interred in the cemetery next to the temple. Upon hearing the news of his death, Eliza R. Snow composed a poem in his honor, part of which reads, quote, He's gone. His work on earth is done. His battle fought. His race is run. Blessed is the path he trod. For he espoused the glorious cause in prompt obedience to the laws of the eternal God, unquote. Even though many Latter-day Saints today are not familiar with Oliver Granger's name, his obedient fulfillment of his duties will stand eternally as a memorial before the Lord and in our scriptures. Sections 119 and 120 include significant instructions about the law of tithing. The law of consecration was revealed to the church at Kirtland in February 1831. While some saints had been unwilling to live the law of consecration, the church's inability up to this point to care for the needs of its poor was due in larger part to its challenging financial situation. In the summer of 1838, the Lord revealed an additional commandment, the law of tithing. Like many of Joseph's revelations, this one came in response to a question. In this case, Joseph asked, quote, O Lord, show unto thy servants how much thou requirest of the properties of thy people for a tithing, unquote. The revealed response to that question first established an initial requirement. D&C 119, verses 1 through 3, quote, Verily thus saith the Lord, I require all their surplus property to be put into the hands of the bishop of my church in Zion, for the building of mine house, and for the laying of the foundation of Zion, and for the priesthood, and for the debts of the presidency of my church. And this shall be the beginning of the tithing of my people, unquote. The first step of this new system was to level the playing field by requiring all saints to contribute whatever surpluses they then had above what they needed to sustain themselves and their families. What properties were considered surplus? Brigham Young recalled, quote, When this revelation was given in 1838, I was present, and recollect the feelings of the brethren. A number of revelations were given on the same day. The brethren wished me to go among the churches and find out what surplus property the people had with which to forward the building of the temple we were commencing at Far West. I accordingly went from place to place throughout the country. Before I started, I asked Brother Joseph, "Who shall be the judge of what is surplus property?" Said he, "Let them be the judges themselves, for I care not if they do not give a single dime. For so far as I am concerned, I do not want anything they have." Unquote. The Lord then established the ongoing requirement. D&C 119, verse 4, quote, "And after that, those who have thus been tithed shall pay 1/10 of all their interest annually, and this shall be a standing law unto them forever, for my holy priesthood, saith the Lord." Unquote. This was the first time that a formal system of tithing, as defined as 1/10 of all their interest annually, was implemented in the church. The words tithe and tithing were mentioned in Joseph's revelations as far back as 1831, but up to this point, those terms had been understood to mean freely giving a gift of any amount to the Lord. In another revelation received that same day, the Lord directed that all tithing receipts were to be overseen by a council composed of the first presidency, the presiding bishopric, and the quorum of the 12 apostles, called my high council, as they were directed by inspiration. Since that time, the Council on the Disposition of the Tithes meets regularly and oversees the expenditures of all church funds worldwide. It approves budgets and financial strategy and establishes financial policy for the Lord's church. Tithing is related to consecration in that both principles require generosity, selflessness, and a commitment to building the kingdom of God on earth. Tithing is not a replacement for consecration. The law of consecration is still in effect, and tithing is a component of or an amendment to the law of consecration. Like the law of consecration, tithing is a standing law unto the saints forever. So, how much is 1/10 of all their interest annually? As with other commandments, how this phrase has been interpreted has varied throughout the history of the church. The earliest interpretation was given by Bishop Edward Partridge, who was present at the meeting in Far West at which Section 119 was received. 2 weeks later, he wrote to Bishop Newell K. Whitney in Ohio and explained that 1/10 of all their interest annually meant 10% of the interest they would earn if they invested their net worth for a year. That changed relatively quickly, however, to be understood by the saints as 1/10 of one's annual increase or income. In 1970, the First Presidency wrote, quote, "For your guidance in this matter, please be advised that we have uniformly replied that the simplest statement we know of is that statement of the Lord himself, that the members of the church should pay 1/10 of all their interest annually, which is understood to mean income. No one is justified in making any other statement than this. We feel that every member of the church should be entitled to make his own decision as to what he thinks he owes the Lord and to make payment accordingly." Unquote. President Joseph F. Smith commented on how we should calculate what we tithe. He said, quote, "Every man is left to be his own judge as to what he calls his tithing, and there is a great variety of opinion as to what a tithing is. A man who works for wages and devotes his whole time to the service of his employer, and he receives $1,000 or $2,000 a year for his salary, it is an easy matter for him to tell how much he owes for tithing. If I earned $2,000 a year, I should know that my tithing was just 1/10 of that, and I would not take out what it had cost me to feed and clothe myself and to pay all the expenses necessary to the maintenance of my family before I reckoned with the Lord as to what belonged to him. $200 would be my honest tithing, would it not? That is the way I look at it. Then, if a farmer raises 2,000 bushels of wheat as the result of his year's labor, how many bushels should he pay for tithing? Well, some people will go straightway to dickering with the Lord. They will say they hired a man so-and-so and his wages must be taken out, that they had to pay such and such expenses and this cost and that cost, and they reckon out all their expenses and tithe the balance. If a man earns $1,000 and it has cost him $600 to live, he pays tithing on the remaining $400. He considers that his net income, and he reckons with the Lord on that basis. Well, a great many of the Latter-day Saints reckon with God in just that way. Now, you are at liberty to do as you please in regard to this matter. You can choose whichever course you wish. But let me say to you that as we measure out, so it will be measured back unto us again. When we go to dickering with the Lord, probably he will dicker with us. And if he undertakes to do so, we shall get the worst of it. I think we had better be honest with the Lord and deal justly and liberally with him. For as it is said in the Scriptures, the liberal man deviseth liberal things, and by his liberality shall he stand. My experience in my childhood was that when the widow paid 1/10 of every bushel of potatoes, of wheat, of oats, of barley, when she paid the 10th chicken or egg, the 10th calf, the 10th colt, the 10th pound of beef or pork, when she did this, she was blessed, and I know it. God opened up her way and multiplied blessings upon her. And though a widow, driven into the wilderness with a large family and without means to take care of them, she never had to ask for or receive help from the church to feed and clothe her or her children. The Lord provided for her because she put her trust in him and she was obedient to his law. I am a witness to that. And the Lord will provide for other widows in the same way. He will provide for all his people according as they put their trust in him and are faithful and obedient. Obedience is better than sacrifice, and to hearken than the fat of rams. It is the heart and the willing mind that the Lord requires of his people, and not so much their substance. He does not need our obedience, but we need to be obedient, for it is through obedience that we will receive the reward. Unquote. That concludes this lesson. If you enjoyed it, please click the thumbs up button and leave a comment below. Please subscribe if you'd like to be notified when new lessons are posted to this channel, and visit www.huarc.org to download these notes and this slideshow. In the next lesson, we'll review and discuss the 1838 Mormon War in Missouri and the imprisonment of the prophet Joseph and other church leaders in Liberty Jail. The reading is Doctrine and Covenants, sections 121 through 123. See you next time.